The magnolia petal drifted from the branch above, landing soft as a secret on Annie's cheek, just as Ellie's lips brushed hers in the shadowed alcove of the hawthorn garden. "We can't keep doing this," Ellie whispered, her voice cracking like the first fracture in fine china. But her fingers tangled deeper into Annie's hair, pulling her closer into the lie they both craved. In that stolen breath, Annie tasted the salt of tears neither would admit to shedding, knowing the world beyond the ivy wall waited to shatter them both. Annie had always believed that love was like the slow boil of gumbo on her grandmother's stove, patient, layered, forgiving of its own imperfections. Born and raised in the cracked sidewalks of Savannah's west side, where shotgun houses leaned against the humid air like weary sinners at Sunday service, she learned early that survival meant stirring through the roux of hardship without letting it burn. At 28, Annie Hawthorne, no, not that Hawthorne, just the one who cleaned their silver and tended their roses, had carved out a life from the scraps of others' excess. She worked as a housekeeper for the elite families along the bluff, those antebellum ghosts who still dressed their grudges in seersucker and pearls. Her hands, callous from scrubbing marble counters and pruning azaleas, told stories her voice rarely did. Of a mother lost to the bottle too young, a father who vanished like marsh fog, and a heart that beat steady for women in a town that preached otherwise from pulpits lined with magnolia wreaths. It started innocently enough, or so Annie told herself in the quiet hours before dawn when she'd lie awake in her narrow bed, the ceiling fan whirring like a guilty conscience. Ellie Hawthorne was the youngest daughter of the Hawthorne dynasty, the kind of name that evoked cotton fields long turned to condos and shipping fortunes that bought silence from the sea. At 32, Ellie moved through Savannah's high society like a debutante in perpetual twilight. Elegant luncheons at the Oglethorpe Club, charity galas where her laughter rang hollow against crystal flutes, and a string of eligible bachelors paraded like peacocks before her father's approving nod. But Annie saw the cracks first. The way Ellie's eyes lingered too long on the curve of a waitress's neck at those soirees, or how she'd slip away to the garden during family dinners, claiming a sudden headache that smelled suspiciously of bourbon and regret. Their worlds collided on a sweltering July afternoon, the kind where the air clung like regret and cicadas screamed hymns to the unrelenting sun. Annie had been summoned to the Hawthorne estate on East Taylor Street, a sprawling Victorian behemoth with columns that whispered of lost causes and verandas wide enough to host a funeral procession. Old Mr. Hawthorne, Ellie's father, a man whose face resembled weathered oak and whose opinions were as unyielding as the family silver, had demanded a deep clean before the annual Forsyth Park picnic, that ritual where Savannah's blue bloods pretended the Civil War was a distant cousin rather than a festering wound. Annie arrived with her kit: lemon oil for the banisters, borax for the grout, and a thermos of sweet tea to steady her nerves against the invisible barriers of class that thickened the air. She was on her knees in the sunroom, coaxing dust from the Persian rug with a stiff bristled brush, when Ellie appeared like a specter in the doorway. No fanfare, no entourage, just a silk blouse unbuttoned at the collar, khakis rolled to her ankles, and bare feet that padded silent across the hardwood. "You missed a spot," Ellie said, her voice low and teasing, but her eyes held something sharper, like the glint of a hidden blade. Annie glanced up, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, and felt the room tilt. Ellie's hair, the color of polished chestnut, fell loose in waves that defied the humidity, and her smile carried the weight of secrets too heavy for one lifetime. From there it unraveled thread by thread. Ellie would linger in the mornings Annie came to dust, offering small talk that bloomed into confessions over stolen cups of chicory coffee in the kitchen. "Father thinks I'm his legacy," Ellie murmured one day, tracing the rim of her mug with a fingertip. "But all I am is his shadow, cut from the same unforgiving cloth." Annie listened, her heart swelling with the ache of recognition, the way society's expectations wrapped around you like Spanish moss, beautiful until it choked the light. She shared fragments of her own world. The West Side block parties where Zydeco spilled from boomboxes and lovers danced without shame under street lamps. The underground poetry slams at the old armory where women like her found voices in the dark. One evening, as thunder rumbled over the river like God's own discontent, Ellie found Annie in the potting shed, rain sheeting the windows like tears on a confessional pane. "I saw you at the market last week," Ellie said, stepping inside without invitation, her dress sodden and clinging. "With that woman from the bookstore. The way you laughed. It was free." I want that. Annie's pulse thrummed, a drumbeat against the storm's fury. She should have stepped back, invoked the chasm between them, the hawthorn silver spoons against her own bent fork, but instead she reached out, her thumb brushing the rain from Ellie's cheek. Their kiss was inevitable, a collision of parched souls in the dim glow of a single bulb, tasting of petrichor and the forbidden fruit of Forsyth's ancient oaks. In the weeks that followed, their affair wove through the estate like kudzu, tangled, relentless, beautiful in its deceit. Stolen moments in the attic among forgotten debutante gowns, where Ellie's whispers turned to gasps against Annie's neck. Lazy afternoons in the carriage house, bodies entwined on horse blankets that smelled of hay and history. Annie felt herself blooming under Ellie's touch, her guarded heart unfurling like a moonflower at dusk. "You're my escape," Ellie breathed one night, her head pillowed on Annie's chest, the distant hum of crickets their only witness. "In a world that demands I play the part, you let me be the whole damn script." But love, Annie learned, was never just the bloom. It was the thorn that drew first blood. Ellie's family tightened their grip as autumn leaves turned the squares to fire. Whispers of an advantageous match with Thomas Beaumont, heir to the Beaumont shipping line, whose family tree was as knotted with old money as the Hawthorns. Mr. Hawthorne's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, began to linger on Annie during her shifts, probing for disloyalty in her averted gaze. And then there was the town itself. Savannah, with its haunted alleys and gossip that spread faster than yellow fever, where a woman's whisper could topple empires built on propriety. One crisp October morning, as Annie polished the grand piano in the parlor, a Steinway that had played waltzes for generations, Ellie swept in, her face pale as bone china. "He's arranging the engagement party," she said, voice flat as the keys under Annie's cloth. "Next month at the club. Thomas will propose with mother's ring." The words hung between them, heavy as the chandelier above, and Annie felt the first crack in her resolve, a sharp intake that tasted of bile. "And you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Ellie's eyes met hers, stormy with conflict. "I have to go through with it. For the family. For the name. But you. That's real. That's mine." Annie wanted to rage, to shatter the crystal decanter on the sideboard, and let the shards mirror her fracturing heart. Instead, she nodded, folding the lie into her pocket like a crumpled handkerchief. That night in the carriage house, their lovemaking was desperate, a tempest of hands and sighs that chased away the chill. "Promise me," Annie murmured against Ellie's throat, "that when it's too much, you'll choose us." Ellie's response was a vow sealed in sweat and shadow. "I swear it. You're the only truth I know." Yet truths in Savannah were fragile things, easily buried under layers of lace and legacy. As the engagement loomed, Ellie began to pull Annie deeper into her facade. Not as lover, but as confidant, the loyal help, who bore the weight of her secrets without question. Annie became the keeper of late-night texts disguised as grocery lists, the alibi for errands that ended in motel rooms on the outskirts where no one asked names. "You're safe," Ellie would say, her fingers interlacing with Annie's in the dim light of a dashboard glow. "No one suspects the help." The words stung, a subtle poison, but Annie swallowed them for the sake of the woman who made her feel seen, whole, alive. Winter crept in on the heels of magnolia ghosts, frosting the river with a deceptive calm. The Hawthorne estate buzzed with preparations. Florists hauling armloads of white roses that bled petals on the drive. Caterers testing canapes that tasted of privilege and pretense. Annie moved through it all like a shadow, her uniform starched to invisibility, but her heart a riot of unspoken pleas. One evening, as she cleared the remnants of a pre-party tasting, caviar smears on porcelain, champagne flutes sticky with excess, Ellie cornered her in the butler's pantry, the door clicking shut like a judge's gavel. "I can't breathe in this," Ellie confessed, her breath ragged, eyes wild as a cornered doe. "Thomas is adequate, polite, but every time he touches me I think of you, of us." She pressed a small velvet box into Annie's palm. A locket, engraved with their initials intertwined like lovers' fingers. "Wear it under your clothes. Let it be our anchor." Annie's throat tightened, the metal cool against her skin as she fastened it around her neck. In that moment, with the pantry's herbs scenting the air like a lover's promise, she believed they could weather the storm. But storms in the south don't announce themselves with thunder. They gather slow, insidious, until the levees break. The night of the engagement party arrived under a canopy of stars that mocked the gathering clouds. The Oglethorpe Club, perched on a bluff overlooking the Savannah River, glowed like a jewel in the crown of old money. Chandeliers dripped light onto tuxedos and gowns, the air thick with cigar smoke and the murmur of deals sealed in bloodlines. Annie, relegated to the kitchens, ferried trays of oysters Rockefeller and shrimp remoulade, her locket a secret talisman burning against her collarbone. She caught glimpses of Ellie through the swinging doors. Radiant in ivory silk, Thomas's hand possessive on her waist, her smile a masterpiece of restraint. Once their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. Ellie's plea silent, desperate, and Annie felt the pull magnetic and merciless. Slipping away during a lull, she found Ellie on the veranda, the river's black ribbon below whispering temptations of escape. "We'll run," Annie said, her voice fierce, gripping Ellie's arms as if she could will the words into reality. "After tonight. To Oregon or Vermont. Somewhere the moss doesn't choke you." Ellie's laugh was bitter, wind-tossed. "And leave what? The only life I've known? Father would disown me. The town would devour us whole." But her kiss was fire urgent, tasting of champagne and goodbye. They parted with promises etched in the dark, unaware that eyes watched from the shadows. Mrs. Hawthorne's personal maid, a woman whose loyalty was bought with Hawthorne silver, her report already forming like bile on her tongue. The fallout came swift as a squall. 2 days later, as Annie knelt in the Hawthorne rose garden, clipping spent blooms under a sky heavy with regret, Mr. Hawthorne's shadow fell across her. "You've overstepped," he said, his voice gravel over steel, a folded newspaper thrust into her hands like an indictment. The society page screamed it. Hawthorne heiress's scandalous liaison with help. Engagement in jeopardy? A grainy photo, pilfered from some hidden vantage, captured Ellie and Annie in the garden alcove, lips locked in defiance. Annie's world splintered. Ellie appeared then, summoned like a prodigal, her face ashen, Thomas looming behind like a vengeful specter. "Tell them it's nothing," Ellie pleaded to her father, but her eyes darted to Annie, wild with apology. Mr. Hawthorne's gaze was ice. "Clarify, Eleanor. For the family's sake." The silence stretched eternal until Ellie spoke, her voice a blade. "It was a mistake. A moment of weakness. Annie." She misunderstood her place. The words landed like blows, each one carving deeper into Annie's chest. She stood, shears forgotten in the dirt, the locket suddenly leaden. "Your place," she echoed, voice steady as the river below. "Or our truth." But Ellie turned away, shoulders rigid, Thomas's arm encircling her like chains. The garden spun, roses blurring to blood, and Annie walked away, the gate clanging shut behind her like the end of an era. In the hollow days that followed, Annie wandered the west side like a ghost unbound, the locket her only tether to the woman who'd unmade her. Savannah streets, once alive with the rhythm of her steps, now echoed with accusations, whispers from corner stores where clerks averted eyes, notes slipped under her apartment door scrawled with slurs that tasted of old hatreds. She quit the Hawthorne estate without ceremony, her final paycheck cashed in silence at the bank on Bull Street, where the teller's pity stung worse than dismissal. Nights blurred into a haze of cheap bourbon and Joan Baez records spinning on her thrift store turntable, the lyrics of Forbidden Love, A Bomb and a Blade. Her best friend Lila, a tattooed firebrand who ran the queer coffee house on the edge of the historic district, tried to pull her from the mire. "That family's poison, Annie," Lila said one rain-lashed afternoon, sliding a mug of chicory across the scarred oak counter, the steam curling like unanswered prayers. "Ellie's just another debutante playing dress-up in her daddy's sins. You deserve a love that doesn't hide in closets." Annie nodded, tracing the locket's edge beneath her shirt, but the words rang hollow. For in the quiet she replayed every touch, every vow, convincing herself that beneath the betrayal lay a love too fierce to extinguish. Ellie, meanwhile, drowned in the Hawthorne manse, a gilded cage where mirrors reflected a stranger's smile. The engagement proceeded with mechanical precision, brunches with the Beaumonts, where Thomas's conversation droned like distant thunder, his touches clinical as a contract clause. Her father, ever the patriarch, patrolled the halls like a warden, His silence is more damning than sermons. We've contained it, he assured her over brandy in the study, the fire crackling judgment. The papers printed the retraction. But mind your indiscretions, Eleanor. Legacy demands purity. Purity. The word choked her. A noose woven from expectations she'd worn since girlhood. At cotillion classes in the shadowed halls of the Girls' Academy, where magnolia blooms pressed in scrapbooks like pressed confessions, she'd learned to curtsy and conceal. Summers at the family compound in Tybee Island, where ocean waves crashed against the bulkhead of her silence, she'd stolen glances at the lifeguards with sun-kissed shoulders, her heart a traitor in her chest. Now, with Annie's absence a void that echoed through every room, Ellie unraveled in private, pacing the sunroom at midnight, clutching the throw pillow that still faintly smelled of lemon oil and longing. She tried to reach out. Letters slipped into Annie's old mailbox on the west side, unsigned pleas scrawled in haste. It was survival, not surrender. Forgive me. But the envelopes returned unopened, stamped with the indifference of finality. Desperation drove her to the coffeehouse one fog-shrouded evening, hood pulled low against the drizzle, heart pounding like a fugitive's. Lila spotted her first, eyes narrowing over the espresso machine. She's not here, she said flatly, wiping steam from her glasses. And even if she was, what makes you think she'd want the scraps of your charade? Ellie's plea tumbled out, raw and unpolished. I love her. God help me, I do. But this town, it devours what it doesn't understand. Lila's laugh was sharp as shattered glass. And you think Annie's some prop in your redemption arc? She's rebuilding, Ellie. Without your shadows. Defeated, Ellie retreated into the mist, the river's murmur mocking her isolation. Spring arrived tentative, dogwoods blushing against the scars of winter. But Annie's healing was a jagged path. She took a job at a small nursery on the outskirts, where the air smelled of turned earth and possibility, coaxing life from soil that remembered neglect. Mornings began with the sun gilding the live oaks, her hands deep in mulch, mind wandering to what-ifs. A life untethered, perhaps in the Pacific Northwest, where rains washed sins clean and women walked hand in hand without whispers. Evenings found her at open mic nights in the Armory's converted space, her poetry spilling like confessions, verses of magnolias that hid thorns, lovers who bloomed in secret. One such night, under the vaulted ceilings where echoes carried every vulnerability, she spotted a familiar silhouette in the back row. Ellie, uninvited, her designer coat draped over a folding chair, eyes fixed on the stage like a penitent at Vespers. When Annie's turn came, she climbed the steps with knees of lead, the microphone cool against her palm. Her poem poured forth unfiltered. Lines of a woman who tasted freedom on another's lips only to swallow glass in the aftermath. We are not footnotes in their legacies, she recited, voice steady as the river's current, but rivers carving canyons through stone hearts. The room held its breath, applause crashing like waves, but Annie's gaze locked on Ellie. Accusation and ache intertwined. Afterward, in the alley behind the venue, crates of empties clinking in the breeze, Ellie emerged from the shadows. That was us, she whispered, stepping close enough for Annie to smell the jasmine of her perfume. A ghost from stolen nights. Every word. Annie's resolve wavered, the locket a pulse against her skin. Then why the lies? Why parade me as your dirty secret while you polish your ring for him? Ellie's tears came then, silver tracks in the sodium glow. Fear, Annie. The kind that runs bone deep in this family. But I ended it. With Thomas. Told him I couldn't. That my heart belonged elsewhere. The confession hung, fragile as a spider's thread. Annie's hand rose, almost touching, then fell. Words are cheap in Savannah. Show me. What followed was a tentative truce, rebuilt in fragments. Clandestine walks along the Factor's Row, where history's ghosts nodded approval. Picnics in the hidden glades of Bonaventure Cemetery, amid angels carved from sorrow, where Ellie spoke of her mother's quiet rebellion. A locked diary of letters to a forbidden love, buried with her in the family plot. She chose silence over scandal, Ellie said, tracing the weathered stone. And it killed her spirit. I won't be her echo. Annie listened, her cynicism softening like clay under rain, glimpsing the woman beneath the hawthorn armor. Vulnerable, fierce, worthy. Yet doubt lingered, a shadow at the feast. As summer swelled, humid and insistent, Ellie's family closed ranks. Invitations to Beaumont events dried up, replaced by Mr. Hawthorne's edicts. Therapy sessions with the family pastor, a rest cure suggested at a clinic in Charleston where wayward daughters were polished like heirlooms. Ellie resisted, her fire kindled by Annie's touch, but the pressure mounted, a vice of expectation. One evening, after a particularly venomous dinner where her father dissected her delusions over pecan pie, she arrived at Annie's door disheveled, mascara-streaked, a bottle of bourbon clutched like a lifeline. "I told him," she gasped, collapsing into Annie's arms on the sagging porch. "About us. About everything." Annie's heart seized, visions of disinheritance and disgrace flashing like lightning. "And?" Ellie pulled back, eyes blazing. He laughed. "Called it a phase like I'm some debutante sowing wild oats. But he won't let it go, Annie. He's hiring investigators, digging into your life, your mother's debts, your aunt's rumors. To break us." The revelation settled like silt, clouding the waters of their fragile peace. Annie held her tighter, the porch swing creaking under their weight, the distant wail of a freight train underscoring the inexorable pull of fate. "Then we fight," she murmured, lips brushing Ellie's temple. "Not in shadows but in light. Let them come." But even as she spoke, a premonition stirred. The reckoning loomed, not as a storm but as the inevitable flood. The investigators arrived like crows to a harvest, black-suited and methodical, their questions probing the West Side's underbelly with the precision of scalpels. Annie fielded them at the nursery one muggy August dawn, clippers in hand, the scent of fresh peat masking the rot of intrusion. "Miss Whitaker," the lead man intoned, his notebook crisp as a subpoena, "we understand you've had associations with the Hawthorne family. Care to elaborate?" She met his gaze, steady as the live oak's roots. "I tend their roses. That's association enough." He pressed, dredging up ghosts, her mother's bar tabs at the dive on Montgomery, whispers of that Whitaker girl from high school lockers, but Annie stonewalled, her silence a dike against the tide. Word spread through the vines of Savannah's grapevine. The Hawthorne scandal, a debutante's dalliance with the help, fodder for bridge clubs and barbershops alike. Ellie bore the brunt in gilded isolation, her phone silenced against a barrage of voicemails from concerned friends, each laced with veiled threats to their social standing. Thomas Beaumont, jilted but vengeful, circulated photos from that fateful garden tryst among the yacht club set, his smile as sharp as the bow of his family's schooner. "She's unstable," he confided over cigars at the Green Meldrum house, "a danger to the bloodline." Ellie sought refuge in Annie's world, the West Side's raw edges a counterpoint to her polished cage. They met in the coffeehouse's back room, where Lila's wary truce allowed stolen hours amid stacks of zines and dog-eared Audre Lorde. "I feel like I'm molting," Ellie confessed one afternoon, sunlight slanting through dusty blinds to gild her uncertainty, "shedding the skin they sewed onto me at birth." Annie traced the lines of her palm, mapping futures unspoken. "Then emerged love, feathers and all." Their laughter mingled, tentative, a bridge over the chasm. But the chasm widened with each passing week. Mr. Hawthorne escalated, summoning Ellie to the study for interventions, sessions with a psychologist imported from Atlanta, his clipboard a shield against her deviant impulses. "It's a sickness, Eleanor," the man droned, his voice syrupy with false empathy, "curable with discipline and prayer." Ellie endured, her compliance a mask but inside fury brewed, a storm-gathering force. Nights after she'd flee to Annie, body trembling with suppressed rage, their lovemaking a reclamation. Slow, deliberate, hands mapping territories no mapmaker dared. Annie too felt the squeeze. Her Aunt May, the family's matriarch in a shotgun house off 37th Street, cornered her with tearful pleas. "That Hawthorne blood's tainted, child. They'll chew you up and spit out the bones just like they did your mama." May's words echoed the town's undercurrent, where class lines were drawn in red clay and queer love was tolerated only in whispers. Yet Annie clung to defiance, joining Lila's underground network, a circle of women who met in the Armory's basement, sharing stories like communal bread. Tales of evictions for immoral conduct, jobs lost to rumors, hearts mended in solidarity. One harvest moon night, as bonfires dotted the marshes and fiddles wailed from riverfront dives, Ellie proposed a bold stroke. "We go public," she said, her voice a spark in the carriage house's gloom, fireflies winking approval through the slats. A statement in the paper. Let the reckoning come on our terms. Annie's breath caught the locket warm as a heartbeat. And your father? The legacy. Ellie's eyes hardened, forged in the kiln of resolve. Let it burn. I'd rather ashes than this half-life. They drafted it together by lantern light. A letter to the Savannah Morning News, words woven with the care of a tapestry, acknowledging their love, decrying the hypocrisies that caged it, calling for a city that embraced its full heart. Savannah thrives on secrets, it read. But secrets starve the soul. We choose light. Sealing the envelope felt like birthing a revolution, their kiss afterward sealed with the gravity of oaths. Submission brought a fragile euphoria, days laced with anticipation. Ellie navigated family dinners with veiled barbs, her father's suspicions sharpening like a blade on whetstone. You've been distant, he noted over antelope loin at the pirate's house, his fork pausing midair. Composing yourself for the wedding? She smiled, porcelain perfect. Composing myself, father. For truth. He waved it off, but unease flickered in his eyes, a candle against encroaching dark. The letter dropped on a Tuesday, front page above the fold, headline stark, Hawthorne heiress defies tradition. A love unbound. The city ignited. Telephones rang off hooks at the news offices. Editorials thundered in rival sheets, some decrying moral decay, others lauding courage in a town built on facades. At the Oglethorpe Club, silverware clattered in stunned silence, matrons clutching pearls like rosaries. Thomas Beaumont, apoplectic, penned a rebuttal dripping venom. A tragic lapse, enabled by those beneath our station. For Annie, the world contracted to her apartment stoop, where reporters gathered like vultures, flashbulbs popping like gunfire. Lila barricaded the door with crates, her shotgun, more prop than peril, propped in the window as deterrent. This is your Phoenix moment, she told Annie over fortified coffee, but phoenixes get singed. Calls came from old flames, aunts, even a reporter from Atlanta offering a sympathetic ear. Annie spoke little, her voice reserved for Ellie, their late-night whispers a lifeline. We're in it now. Together. Ellie faced Armageddon at home. Mr. Hawthorne's roar echoed through the manse, shattering a crystal vase in the foyer. A heirloom from 1865, now dust. You've ruined us, he bellowed, face purple as storm clouds, veins bulging like river tributaries. The Beaumonts withdraw, the club whispers boycott. For what? A whim with the help. Ellie stood tall, the letters ink still fresh on her skin. For love, father. The kind you denied, mother. The slap came swift, a crack like lightning, her cheek blooming red. But she didn't fall. Hit me if you must. It changes nothing. In the aftermath, Ellie packed a single valise, fleeing to Annie's under cover of night. The estate's lights receding like a sinking ship. They huddled on the narrow bed, the city's pulse thrumming beyond the walls. Protests forming in Johnson Square, rainbow flags unfurling against Confederate ghosts. Counter-demonstrators chanting slurs from pickup beds, tires screeching on cobblestones. We started a fire, Annie murmured, Ellie's head on her shoulder, the locket shared between them now. Hope it warms more than it burns. But fires unchecked consume. Whispers turned to threats. Bricks through the coffeehouse window, scrawled with Sodom's daughters. Anonymous calls to Annie's nursery, orders cancelled in pious outrage. Lila armed the group, distributing flyers for a solidarity rally, her voice a clarion. They want to bury us? We'll grow roots through their coffins. Ellie, once fragile as spun glass, found steel in the fray, speaking at the rally, her words a manifesto. Savannah's beauty lies in its hidden rivers, its untold stories. Let ours flow free. Yet beneath the blaze, doubt flickered. One dawn, as mist rose from the river like exhaled secrets, Ellie confessed over eggs at a diner counter, vinyl stools sticky with history. What if it's too much? The cost. Your life, appended for my folly. Annie's hand covered hers, thumb stroking knuckles white with fear. Your folly became our truth. And truths endure. But in her core, Annie felt the tremor, the reckoning's shadow lengthening, promising not just light, but the blaze that forges or destroys. Autumn's palate bled into Savannah's veins. crimson sumac and ochre palmetto fronds framing a city on the brink, where every square held a vigil or a vigilante. The rally swelled beyond Johnson Square, spilling into the streets like ink from a tipped bottle, voices rising in chorus against the old guard's grip. Annie and Ellie stood at the fore, hands clasped defiantly, their story the spark that ignited long smoldering grievances. Queer youth from the projects, black femmes from the islands, allies weary of the town's two-faced waltz. "This ain't just about us," Annie addressed the crowd, megaphone heavy as hope, her voice carrying over the rustle of Spanish moss. "It's about every secret Savannah tried to drown in the river." Cheers erupted, but so did the backlash. A serpent uncoiling. Mr. Hawthorne, cornered in his empire of influence, struck from the shadows. Lawsuits loomed against the news for defamation. Though the paper stood firm, its editor a grizzled Yankee transplant unmoved by Southern bluster. The Oglethorpe Club expelled Ellie by proxy, her membership revoked in a letter sealed with wax that smelled of finality. Thomas Beaumont, nursing grudges like fine scotch, leaked embellished tales to the tabloids. Annie as a predatory opportunist, Ellie as a fractured flower led astray. The words wormed through society pages, poisoning wells Annie hadn't known existed. Ellie weathered it with a brittleness that alarmed Annie. Days lost to staring at the ceiling, nights jolted awake by nightmares of disfigured family portraits. "I'm the villain now," she whispered one evening, curled on the apartment's threadbare rug, rain pattering the tin roof like accusatory fingers. The daughter who spat on the silver spoon. Annie knelt beside her, combing fingers through chestnut waves, murmuring litanies of endurance. "Villains don't fight for light love. You're the dawn." But endurance frayed at the edges. Lila's coffeehouse became a fortress, boarded windows daubed with murals of defiant lovers, Sappho entwined with Sojourner, magnolias bursting into rainbows. Business halved, but the space thrived as hub. Strategy sessions over lukewarm brew, poetry slams that doubled as therapy. Annie found purpose there, organizing supply drives for targeted families, her hands no longer idle but instruments of change. Yet the personal toll mounted, sleep evading her like a skittish cat, appetite dulled to ash. The breaking point came unannounced, a Hawthorne courier arriving at dusk with a manila envelope, its seal unbroken like a wound waiting to weep. Inside, a notarized disinheritance, Ellie's name excised from the will like a tumor, accompanied by a check, 6 figures cold as the paper it stained. "Take it and go," the note read in her father's script. "Or watch your paramour's world crumble further." Ellie crumpled it, tears scorching the ink, but the seed of fracture took root. That night, over a dinner of cornbread and collards scavenged from May's garden, she broached the unthinkable. "We could leave," she said, voice soft as falling leaves. "Cash it, start fresh in Portland. Rain instead of recriminations." Annie's fork paused, greens wilting on her plate. Run? After all this? The word tasted of surrender, of the very closets they'd stormed. Ellie's eyes pleaded, raw with the calculus of love and loss. Not run. Retreat. Build without their boot on our necks. The argument simmered, words heating like gumbo roux. Annie's fire for the fight clashing with Ellie's fatigue, born of a lifetime under siege. "This city's our story," Annie countered, rising to pace the cramped kitchen, shadows dancing like specters. "We don't rewrite the ending because it hurts." Ellie recoiled, the check's weight invisible but crushing. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one they branded traitor." The silence that followed was a chasm, widening with each heartbeat. Annie reached for her, but Ellie pulled away, retreating to the bedroom, door clicking like a lock. Alone in the dim, Annie sank to the floor, locket clutched in fist, the metal biting palm. Betrayal's echo, faint but familiar, stirred. Ellie's words not a slap like her father's, but a erosion slow and insidious. Dawn found them civil but distant, coffee poured in parallel, touches withheld like rations. The rally that weekend marked the movement's zenith, thousands converging on Forsyth Park under a sky bruised purple, banners fluttering like prayers. Speakers thundered, activists from Atlanta, elders from the Gullah shores, but the air crackled with undercurrent, police lines thickening at the edges. Annie and Ellie took the stage together, a tableau of unity. Ellie reading from their letter, voice gaining strength with each syllable, Annie interweaving verses of resilience. The crowd roared, a tide of affirmation, but as they descended, a figure emerged from the throng, Mr. Hawthorne, flanked by Beaumont heavies, his face a mask of paternal thunder. "Daughter," he called, voice slicing the din. "Enough of this farce." Ellie froze, the Park Oaks witnesses to her falter. Annie stepped forward, shield and spear. "She's made her choice, sir. Respect it." His laugh was bark, devoid of mirth. "Choice? This delusion? I've offered terms, reconciliation if she severs ties." His gaze raked Annie, disdain distilled. "Send the help packing and all's forgiven." Ellie's hand tightened in Annie's, knuckles bone white, but her eyes flickered. Temptation's whisper, legacy's siren song. The confrontation dissolved into chaos. Chance drowning his retort, security ushering him away. But the damage lingered, a hairline fracture in their front. Back at the apartment, Ellie paced, the check unearthed from its drawer like a Pandora's artifact. "He means it," she said, voice fracturing. "The estate, the trusts, gone forever. For what? A cause that might bury us both." Annie's temper ignited, words spilling hot. "For dignity. For a love that doesn't kneel." But Ellie's resolve wavered, tears carving channels. "Dignity's cold comfort when we're homeless, Annie. I love you, God I do, but maybe we need space. To breathe." The plea landed like exile. Annie nodded, numb, watching Ellie pack the valise anew. Not for Portland but for a neutral ground. Lila's spare room, a buffer against the blaze. "Just time," Ellie promised at the door. Kiss lingering like a last supper. To sort the wreckage. Alone again, Annie wandered to the riverfront, the Savannah's current a mirror to her turmoil. Eddies of what was, rapids of what might be. The locket, once anchor, now chafed, a reminder of vows bent by pressure. Weeks blurred into a limbo of echoes. Ellie at strategy meetings, her contributions sharp but sparse. Annie channeling rage into pamphlets, her poetry turning thorned. Lila mediated, her cynicism softened by concern. "She's scared, not cruel," she told Annie over midnight tea, steam veiling her face. Hawthorne blood runs thick with capitulation. But Annie felt the pull of old wounds, the socialite's convenience. Love as camouflage until the mask cracked under scrutiny. The climax brewed in a whispered tip from May. A secret meeting at the Hawthorne compound. Ellie summoned for final parley. Annie tailed her there, heart a war drum, hiding in the oleanders as dusk bled to night. Through the study window, silhouettes sharpened. Ellie and her father, words inaudible but gestures eloquent. His hand extended, check proffered, hers hesitating then closing around it. A nod, a turn toward the door, and Annie's world inverted. Betrayal, not in denial but in compromise. The socialite reclaiming her throne, one concession at a time. She confronted Ellie on the drive, gravel crunching underfoot, moon silvering the tears on her face. "You took it," Annie accused, voice raw as exposed root. "Sold us for silver." Ellie's denial crumbled under scrutiny. Not sold. Borrowed time. To fight smarter from within. But the lie tasted stale even to her. Annie's laugh was shattered crystal. "From within their cage? You're choosing chains again." The argument raged, voices rising to meet the cicada's dirge, until Ellie whispered the unspeakable. "Maybe I am. Maybe that's who I am." The severance came quiet. A severing of threads woven in shadow. Ellie returned to the manse, valise in tow. Annie to her apartment, locket discarded in the river's embrace, its glint swallowed by depths. The movement surged on, rallies fiercer without their figurehead. But Annie's fire dimmed to embers, the reckoning's cost etched in solitude. Winter clamped down on Savannah like a miser's fist, the river icing at edges, winds howling through the squares as if mourning the year's unravelings. Annie moved through her days mechanized, a automaton in the nursery's chill greenhouses, transplanting seedlings that mocked her barren ground. The locket's absence left a hollow at her throat, a phantom itch where love once warmed. Sleep came fitful, haunted by dreams of alcoves and whispers, waking to the stark reality of an empty bed, and a city that had feasted on her vulnerability. The movement persisted, a hydra of resilience. Rallies evolving into policy pushes, petitions circling City Hall for anti-discrimination ordinances. Lila helmed it with unyielding zeal, her coffeehouse a beacon amid boarded facades, now repainted with murals of interlocking hands. "Don't let her eclipse you," she urged Annie during a supply sort. Boxes of flyers stacking like fortifications. "You're the root that holds." Annie nodded, but roots she knew could wither unseen. Her poetry dried up, verses aborted on napkins that she burned in the sink, flames devouring what words could no longer contain. Ellie, reinstalled in the hawthorn fold, navigated a purgatory of probation. Her father, triumphant in reclamation, doled affections like rations, supervised outings to the club, where sidelong glances branded her the prodigal returned. The check's funds vanished into reparations, donations to conservative causes, a balm for bruised egos. Thomas lurked peripheral, his overtures rebuffed but insistent, a reminder of paths not taken. Nights alone in her childhood suite, Ellie traced the wallpaper's faded florals, each petal a memory of Annie's touch, soft, insistent, alive. Regret coiled in her gut, a serpent devouring from within. She tried atonement in fragments. Anonymous contributions to the queer fund slipped through Lila's back door like contraband. Letters to Annie, penned in fever but posted unsigned, words of apology dissolving in unsent ink. One gray afternoon, desperation propelled her to the west side. Hood up against the drizzle, knocking on Annie's door with knuckles raw from restraint. May answered, eyes narrowing like bayou slits. "She's out. And even if not, girl, you've done enough damage." Ellie wilted, retreating to the riverwalk, where barges groaned past like weary confessions. The thaw brought no mercy, only revelations. A leaked email chain surfaced in activist circles. Mr. Hawthorne's machinations, bribes to councilmen to quash the ordinances, veiled threats against sponsors. The city fractured further, protests clashing with countermarches, tear gas canisters blooming like foul flowers in Calhoun Square. Annie, pulled back into the fray by Lila's call, found her voice anew at a candlelit vigil for a trans elder evicted in the crossfire. "They think they can buy silence," she proclaimed, flames dancing in her eyes. "But silence is the grave we refuse." Applause swelled, cathartic, but in the crowd's edge, she spotted Ellie, unbidden, tear-streaked, a ghost seeking absolution. Their reunion unfolded in the armory's green room post-vigil. Air thick with incense and ink. Ellie entered hesitant, coat shedding rain like shed skin. "I saw you up there," she said, voice athread. "Radiant. Whole." Annie's arms crossed, barrier and blade. "Whole without your strings, you mean?" The air crackled, words tumbling. Ellie's pleas for forgiveness, tales of her father's tightening leash, therapy mandates, engagement pressures renewed with Thomas as pawn. "I thought compromise would free us," she confessed, sinking to a folding chair. "But it's just another cage, gilded and gaping." Annie paced, the room's walls closing like memories. "You chose it. Again." But beneath anger, empathy stirred. A recognition of the war Ellie waged within, bloodlines versus beating heart. "Show me different," Annie challenged, halting before her. "Not words. Action." Ellie's nod was solemn, a covenant renewed in vulnerability. What followed was a clandestine alliance, shadows of their former blaze. Ellie funneled intel from the inside. Board meeting minutes smuggled in her garter, whispers of bribes recorded on hidden apps. They met in neutral territories, the cemetery's labyrinthine paths, where Spanish moss muffled stratagems, derelict piers where the river swallowed secrets. Intimacy crept back tentative, fingertips brushing in passing, kisses stolen in fog banks, each a reclamation against the void. "I see you now," Ellie murmured one twilight, head on Annie's lap amid gravestones. Not as escape but equal. Annie's heart, scarred but supple, yielded inch by inch. The counteroffensive mounted. Armed with Ellie's leaks, the movement struck. Press conferences in the news bullpen, exposés timed to derail council votes. Mr. Hawthorne's facade cracked, denials ringing hollow as headlines screamed corruption. Allies emerged from unlikely quarters. A Beaumont cousin, queer and closeted, pledging funds, society wives chafing under similar yokes, hosting salon-style fundraisers in sunrooms veiled by shears. Savannah shifted, tectonic, ordinances inching forward, whispers turning to wary respect. But victory's edge honed dangers. Thomas, spurned anew, escalated, tailing Ellie to rendezvous, his sedan idling like a predator in alley mouths. One night, as Annie and Ellie emerged from a strategy huddle in the coffeehouse basement, headlights pinned them, engine revving menace. "Slut!" he snarled from the window, bottle arcing to shatter at their feet, glass shards winking like fallen stars. They fled hand in hand, pulses thundering, the incident fueling a restraining order that barely deterred his rage. Ellie's father struck surgical. A midnight confrontation in the manse's drive, where he cornered her returning from errands. "Traitor twice over," he hissed, ledger in hand, proof of her pilfered documents. "I'll bury your little insurgency." Fear gripped her visceral, but so did fury, a lifetime's dam breaking. "Bury it? You've buried enough, mother's light, my soul. No more." She fled to Annie, collapsing in sobs that racked like fever, the ledger thrust forward like contrition's offering. In that shattering, Annie glimpsed the precipice. "Love not as bomb but forge. We expose it all," she declared, holding Ellie through the tremors. "Your father's empire, the whole rotten core. Let the public reckoning consume the lies." Ellie, hollow but hardening, agreed. Dawn broke on their pact, the river gilded, promising flood or baptism. Yet as plans coalesced, a bombshell presser, evidence arrayed like indictments, Annie felt the old tremor. Trust's fragile lattice tested by tempests. Ellie's eyes, once stormy, now held a clarity born of breaking, but shadows lingered. "If it costs everything," she vowed, lips to Annie's temple, "we rise from the ash together." Annie clung, willing belief, unaware the ultimate betrayal brewed not in boardrooms, but in the heart's quiet capitulations. The press conference convened under a spring sky washed clean by overnight rains, azaleas nodding approval from the courthouse steps. Reporters clustered like iron filings to a magnet, cameras hungry for the spectacle Savannah craved. Downfall of a dynasty, redemption of the defiant. Annie and Ellie ascended the podium side by side, hands brushing in silent solidarity, the ledger's copies distributed like communion wafers. Lila flanked them, bullhorn at ready, her presence a bulwark against the fray. Ellie spoke first, voice steady as the spire above, words honed to scalpel's edge. "My family built fortunes on the backs of secrets, silences bought with blood money, legacies laced with lies." She unveiled the evidence. Ledgers detailing bribes to quash queer rights, emails plotting smears against activists. Gasps rippled through the crowd, flashbulbs erupting like judgment stars. Annie followed, her testimony a poet's thunder. "We are not scandals to be swept under Persian rugs. We are the heartbeat of this city, pulsing against the stone that seeks to still us." The city detonated. By vespers, indictments swirled, federal probes into embezzlement, city council resignations cascading like dominoes. Mr. Hawthorne barricaded in the manse, his empire crumbling via stock dips and sponsor flights, the society pages eulogizing the fall of House Hawthorne. Thomas Beaumont vanished to Europe, his yacht cutting waves like a fugitive's tale. Ellie, unmoored, watched from Annie's porch as news vans prowled the west side, their story exalted from tabloid fodder to emblem of change. But triumph tasted bittersweet, laced with the ash of personal pyres. Ellie, stripped of inheritance, sold heirlooms piecemeal, grandmother's pearls to fund legal defenses, the Steinway to a collector upriver. "It's freedom's price," she told Annie over a sparse supper of rice and beans, the apartment's walls echoing with newfound quiet. Annie nodded, but worry gnawed. Ellie's smiles, once effulgent, now edged with exhaustion, her gaze drifting to the river as if seeking escape's current. The ordinances passed in a session marinated in scrutiny, council votes swaying under public glare. Celebrations erupted in the squares, dances under live oaks, toasts with sweet tea spiked by joy. Annie and Ellie led a march down Bull Street, rainbow sashes fluttering, hands entwined for cameras and conscience. "We did this," Ellie whispered amid the throng, her laugh genuine, unshadowed. Annie squeezed, heart-swelling love, tempered in fire gleaming pure. Yet the reckoning's aftershocks quaked private foundations. One humid eve, as lightning bugs scripted the garden, Ellie confessed over porch rockers, bourbon glasses sweating condensation. "Father called. From his lawyer's office stroked, they say. Begging truce." Her voice wavered, filial cords pulling taut. Annie tensed, old wounds suppurating. Truce? After the graves he dug. Ellie's eyes, conflicted seas, met hers. Not for him. For me. To say goodbye without hate. The visit unfolded in a Charleston hospital. Sterile halls humming indifference. Mr. Hawthorne lay diminished, tubes snaking like concessions. His hawk's gaze softened to Sparrow's plea. Eleanor. He rasped, hand extending frail. Forgive an old fool. Ellie knelt, tears tracing familiar paths, words spilling. Indictments of his hypocrisies, elegies for stolen lives. You taught me chains, father. I chose wings. He nodded, a ghost of smile. And in that dissolution humanity flickered. Not absolution but understanding's fragile bridge. Annie waited outside, river winds whispering benedictions, her own forgiveness a private alchemy. Not for him but for the girl Ellie had been, shackled by his shadow. When Ellie emerged, spent but serene, they drove home in silence, hands linked over gearshift. The ledger's weight lifted like a stone from sepulchre. Summer crested, magnolias unfurling defiant, and with it renewal's tender shoots. Ellie found work at the News, her byline a beacon for untold stories. Queer elders' oral histories, gullah healers' lore. Annie expanded the nursery into a community plot. Rows of vegetables feeding the movement's foot soldiers, her hands in soil a metaphor for growth. Their love, once clandestine bloom, flowered open. Walks in Forsyth hand in hand, kisses under verandas no longer veiled. A life woven from threads of hard-won light. One golden afternoon amid the plot's green bounty, Ellie knelt beside Annie, dirt-streaked and radiant. Marry me, she said, not with ring but with a sprig of wild jasmine twined into a crown. Not in their clubs but here, in the earth we tilled. Annie's yes was a vow, sealed in soil and sun, laughter bubbling free. The wedding came simple, under a live oak in Bonaventure. Graves nodding witness to eternities forged. May officiated, her voice rich as pralines. Lila emceed, toasts laced with irreverence. Vows exchanged petals for promises. In shadows and storms I choose you. Rings hammered from salvaged silver. Encircled fingers scarred by struggle. Years later, as they rocked on a porch overlooking the river, adopted daughter scampering through azaleas, the city a mosaic of progress etched by their hands, Annie reflected on the arc love had not erased the lies, but transmuted them, reckoning not destruction but dawn. Savannah, ever haunted, now harbored more hearts unafraid. A testament to two women who dared the flood, emerging not unscathed but whole. In the hush of twilight, Ellie leaned close, breath warm on Annie's neck. We turned their cage to constellation. Annie smiled, locket long discarded but its echo eternal. And the stars? They guide us still.